Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? Y'all, it's spooky season again. Woo, my favorite season, frankly. So we're back again for, I believe, is that the third year in a row or
I kind of
fourth
feel like it's
year?
the fourth year.
Okay, probably the
Because we
fourth
did
year in a
it during the
row.
pandemic. So 2020,
Oh, so
2021,
true.
2022,
So,
3, 4.
so from the beginning. All right. So fourth year in a row of doing creepy stories from Asia or based in Asia, where we respectively read one scary story that's supposedly true, but I feel like half the time I'm like, this doesn't sound real. But anyways, and then the other person will react to it. So enjoy. Let's go.
My story is courtesy of user 15 hours creepy, which I found on No Sleep. It's called The Last Bus. My story revolves around another one of Singapore's obscure ways of placating spirits. Although not officially proven, many Singaporeans, especially those who work late shifts, have claimed to have either had odd experiences when riding on the last bus back home. More specifically, these experiences revolved around the last buses making stops at every single bus stop, even when there was no one waiting at that stop and when no one had indicated their intention to get off at that stop. None of the transport companies would publicly admit to such a method, but we all knew that these last buses, besides serving as transport for the living, also served as transport for wandering souls that needed help to get to their destination. As such, in order to reduce the risk of these souls from approaching and harassing people on the streets, these buses would pick them up instead and drop them at their desired spot. I've only had the chance of riding on the last bus once. I work as a logistics manager for a rather well known shipping company. I typically work the day shift and never had the need to drive a car since both my living and work locations were near the train stations. However, last week, due to a glitch in the system, one of our clients had received an incorrect quantity of orders, and I had to personally go down to their worksite in order to apologize to the managers as well as arrange for alternative arrangements for the rest of the order to arrive. Annoyingly, this particular worksite was located way off the main roads, and no taxi driver would be willing to drive down the rocky and uneven side road. The only way in or out was by bus. By the time the meeting was over, it was just past midnight, and with my phone out of battery, it seemed like I was up for a long walk down a dark, quiet road. Being a 28-year-old female, it was a task I certainly did not relish. Just as I was about to begin to walk the long walk, a pair of headlights beamed down the street from behind. A turn behind revealed the source of lights to be that of a bus, as it rumbled down the road towards the bus stop just ahead of me. Grinning in relief, I waved my arms like a maniac and jogged down to the bus stop. I gratefully got onto the bus as its doors opened. "Uncle," I greeted the elderly driver respectfully as I tapped my card. He smiled warmly at me as I settled down onto the front seat. The bus, as expected at this time of the night, was empty, and I thought it would be rude to sit in my usual seat in the back. "Late night, Xiao Mei?" he asked me as the bus lumbered off. As we conversed, I began to notice that the bus, for some odd reason, was stopping at each bus stop. My mind flashed back to all the stories about spirits at the bus stops and shivered involuntarily as I stared at the empty doorway in front of me as we pulled up at yet another empty bus stop. The driver glanced back over to me and chuckled. "Sorry," he smiled. "Last bus, so we have special passengers to pick up. Just stay in your seat, don't worry." I nodded understandingly and pulled my jacket tightly around my body. Although I was sure the temperature in the bus had not dropped, it seemed noticeably colder as the bus went on. As the bus neared a stop that would signal the start of the busier main road, the driver suddenly swore and hit his fist onto the steering wheel. I jumped in shock and glanced around anxiously, realizing that the bus driver was staring out of the window and towards the upcoming bus stop. Like the other bus stops, it was empty. But unlike the others, the lights on this bus stop were dimmer and flickering. It held an eerie atmosphere. Shaking his head and muttering to himself, he slowed the bus down and hissed at me. "Close eyes, don't look." Now thoroughly alarmed, I opened my mouth to speak. As the bus rolled to a stop, the driver turned to me and hissed again, more urgently this time. "Don't look, don't move, don't say anything. Quick." Sensing his urgency, I slammed my eyelids shut. I shoved my trembling fists into the pockets of my jacket as I tried my best to stop shivering in fear. I could hear the bus doors squeak open. It was absolutely silent in the bus, and I could hear my heart pounding loudly. Then footsteps, heavy, slow footsteps, as someone climbed up the stairs into the bus. A low rumbling noise could be heard in tandem with occasional snorts and huffs. It sounded as if a cow was entering the bus, although that was, of course, not possible. Like I said, the bus stop had been empty. I could sense a strange pressure exerted all around me as the footsteps stopped right beside my seat. The air was thick and stale, and I struggled to breathe. Sweat dripped down my head as I strained to keep my eyelids shut. It took everything I could to stop myself from jumping out of the bus and running away into the night. The snorts and huffs became louder as I sensed the entity bend over me. I could feel its breaths ruffle the hairs at the top of my head. My bladder threatened to give way. Suddenly, I heard the bus driver shout, "Go sit behind," he yelled in Mandarin. "Leave her alone." The entity growled, and I could feel my seat shake in unison. "Go!" the driver roared again, louder than the last time. I could hear him stomping his feet loudly and his hands banging loudly on the steering wheel. It seemed as if he was trying to scare the entity to the back of the bus. I silently prayed that his efforts would work. Finally, with yet another low rumble and snort, the footsteps finally started up again and slowly subsided as the entity stomped towards the back of the bus. I kept my eyes screwed shut as I heard the driver swear under his breath again. The door squeaked shut, and the bus jolted as it resumed its course. After a couple minutes, the driver addressed me once more. "You can open your eyes again, Xiaomei." I hesitantly opened my eyes. The driver glanced over to me and smiled warmly. "Scary, I know. He doesn't usually ride the bus, but don't worry, Agong will protect you." I still wasn't feeling entirely reassured, but forced myself to nod. I took comfort from the composure that the driver was exuding, as well as his apparent experience in ferrying the supernatural around. As the bus drove into the bus station, he turned to me again and gestured for me to once again close my eyes. I immediately complied, and after a couple of minutes of nerve-wracking snorting and uncomfortable pressure, did the entity exit the bus. I finally felt at ease and could hear the driver wheeze in relief and broke into a light chuckle. "Good, good. He gone. Now you can go." He gestured towards the open door. As I exited the bus, I paused at the doorway. "Uncle, For some reason, this bus ride had drawn me emotionally towards the driver. He exuded a warm, paternal-like feeling and had been friendlier to me than any other bus driver I had ever met. It's okay, Xiaomei. Late already. Go home rest." He smiled warmly at me. I nodded and stepped off the bus. The door closed behind me and the bus drove off, disappearing into the bus docking bay. It was only then I realized the bus station was completely empty. There were no other people about, and the lights had dimmed in the bus waiting areas. All the signboards had been switched off, and my footsteps echoed eerily as I walked towards the exit, swiveling my head around in hopes of seeing another person. I looked at my watch. It was a little past 1 a.m., so it made sense for the place to be empty. But surely there should be at least a guard to receive riders on that last bus. As I turned the corner towards the exit, I realized the reason for the emptiness of the place. Shutters had been pulled down the exit and were locked firmly into place. "Shit," I muttered. My phone had ran out of juice, so there goes the idea of calling for help. I turned toward the CCTV camera, blinking in the top corner, and waved at it. "Hello? Could someone help?" I called out. I headed back down the way I came, hoping to perhaps bump into the friendly bus driver in the docking bay. No luck. The automatic glass door that I had entered from had mysteriously locked by itself during my attempts to leave. No matter how much I waved my hands or moved my body about, the sensors on the door remained dark, and the door remained shut. "Goodness sakes," I swore. Banging my fist loudly against the glass door, I yelled, "Hello? Uncle? Anyone there?" Suddenly, the sounds of footsteps echoed down the hallway behind me, and a beam of light shone down towards me. "Hello?" a man's voice called out. "Is someone there?" "The door is locked," I shouted back, grinning madly in relief. The footsteps drew closer, and two men rounded the corner. One wore a uniform with the word security printed over it, while the other had donned a bus driver's uniform instead. Judging from the backpacks they were carrying, it seemed like they were getting ready to leave. The security guard shone his torch at me and frowned in confusion. "How did you get in? The bus station closed a long time ago." I gestured towards the empty bus bay. "I took the last bus." The two men exchanged confused glances before the driver spoke up. His English was somewhat more broken than that of the security guard and held a tinge of a Taiwanese accent. Last bus come in 1 hour ago. What are you talking about? I froze and shook my head. No, I took the last bus in. I just alighted like 10 minutes ago. What number bus? He demanded. As I stammered out the bus number, both men paused and turned to each other. Their voices dropped into a low rumble as they whispered urgently to each other. It's him again, the driver hissed. The security guard impatiently and looked at me. She looks the same. Sorry, I interrupted tentatively. Who do I look like? The two men stared at each other again before the driver shrugged. Let her see, he murmured. The guard gestured at me. Follow us, we'll show you. As I followed the two men down the dark hallway, my left hand closed onto my phone. Although I knew that it would be foolish to follow these two strange men into the empty hallway, I was intrigued about their exchange and I wanted to know more. My phone, I figured, was the closest thing to a weapon that I had. The two men stopped at a room marked personnel drivers. The guard unlocked the door and pushed it open before switching on the lights. The room was lined with rows of lockers, each presumably belonging to a bus driver. Behind, the driver nodded as the guard moved further into the room. I hesitated, not quite trusting these two men. Yeah, the driver exclaimed, throwing his hands into the air. Girl, just go and see behind. I followed the guard hesitantly, making sure to keep both men in sight. Finally, he stopped at a locker and pulled it open. It was unlocked and a thin film of dust coated its shelves. It was mostly empty, except for two photographs stuck onto its door. The first photograph was a group shot of many bus drivers in the bus docking bay. In the bottom row was the friendly bus uncle, his arms looping over the shoulders of the other drivers as they grinned at the camera. That's him, the driver, I said, pointing at the uncle. I heard the driver mutter behind me, and the guards impatiently at him again. I leaned in for the second picture. It was one of the uncle's family. They were standing, huddled over each other as the uncle sat smiling behind a birthday cake. Confused at what I was looking at, I ran my gaze over the different people in the photo before settling on one. Standing behind the uncle was a girl my age, besides the fact that she had a birthmark on the side of her face and triple ear piercings on each ear. She was pretty much the splitting image of myself. That's his granddaughter, the guard said as he pointed at the girl's face. Okay, I shrugged. She looks like me. Why are you showing me this? Zhang passed away years ago already, girl, the driver piped up behind me. He only fetched you tonight because you look like her. I felt my mouth grow dry as I tried to figure out what the driver was saying. What? I croaked out. Zhang was the driver of the last bus, until a few years ago when he passed away, old age, the guard explained as he brushed dust off the shelves in the locker. But now and then we get people like you, all girls, who claim to ride the last bus with Zhang. All these girls like you all look the same. You all look like his granddaughter. He drive you because he want to keep you safe. Zhang always loved his family, the driver continued. He protect you from demons, right? Still trying to process what they were saying, I nodded dumbly. I couldn't think of anything to say. The two men nodded knowingly. You are lucky that Zhang picked you up. Some of these demons are very dangerous, the guard said. They shut the locker closed. Come, we'll bring you outside. As I followed the two men down the empty hallways towards the exit, a flash of movement caught my eye. I turned to my side where there was a large window looking into the bus bay where I had alighted from the bus previously. Right in the corner, next to the entrance of the docking bay, stood the friendly bus uncle. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at him, not quite sure how to react. He stood in the shadows, still, before breaking into a soft, warm smile. He slowly raised his arm and waved at me before disappearing back into the shadows. It was only then that I, arm half raised in mid-wave, realized that I was crying, tears dripping down my chin. Did you see him, Atsang? The two men had realized that I was no longer following them and had backtracked. They peered through the window, squinting, as they tried to catch a glimpse of their old friend. I nodded and wiped my tears away. Atsang, the driver hollered loudly and knocked on the glass. Atsang, time to go home. Take care of yourself, Zhang, the security guard added. I wasn't sure, but it seemed like tears were glistening in the eyes of both men as they turned away from the window. Atsang never reappeared from the docking bay again, and I finally headed home. By the time I reached home, it was a little past 2 a.m. The next day, my supervisor, enraged at hearing that I had reached home at such an ungodly hour, decided to reassign all late night appointments to another coworker who owned a car instead. I never had the chance to ride the last bus again. Part of me wanted to head back down to that quiet, winding side road and hopefully meet the friendly bus uncle again. But I knew that the person he wanted to meet was not me, but the girl in the photograph. I don't know who she is, but I'll keep an eye out for her now. If I ever meet her, I'll tell her one thing, that her grandfather is waiting for her on the last bus.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks, y'all. That's sweet. I mean, I know it's a scary story, but it's still sweet. I had no idea where this story was going. I was like, is this a Sixth Sense situation? Is she dead? Like, she's dead. She's a ghost. I thought that was where that was headed. I like this story because it's not, like, I can still believe that it would be fake, but it's not so outrageous that I could not like put myself in her shoes of like being on this last bus, and because she didn't really see anything, but the idea that you're just like in this fear and you have sounds and like pressure and tension and someone yelling at you to close your eyes but you don't really know what's happening, and then being told all this lore around it, like I could see myself in that. So I think that's what's cool about this story, is like it's believable-ish in that way. And also maybe because it's set in Singapore, so there's that kind of like Asian uncle vibe of like, I was like, oh, that's a nice little Asian uncle. Like, I felt like he was taking care of me even in that story. So I liked it. That's cute.
It's kind of a ghost story, but not your typical scary ghost story. And as I was researching different stories to pull from, I think one of the challenges that I ran into is that there are all these very like well-established lore. So I think in a previous episode, I had talked about my mom's experience with like mountain gremlins, and she had talked about that. But there are not a lot of written stories in English for obvious reasons around that. But I thought this was like a really interesting, almost more like modern take on a gremlin story or like a spiritual story, because it's like the guys driving the bus to pick them up. I almost thought of it as like, oh my gosh, it's like the Totoro bus, and it's just like coming around and like picking up all these spirits, and then like, so I thought it was kind of like a cute Halloween-y story.
Mine is the usual, but it's a little different. I started our intro with kind of like, who knows if it's real or not? I mean, I don't think this is real necessarily. I think this is a very well written, like real, like you could imagine maybe it's real, but I don't think it's real. And apparently it is like a modern take on one of the like very classical, not demons, but like a haunting of a certain woman, but like a modern take of it. So this is also from No Sleep, No Sleep on Reddit. The user is M59Gar. Title is During a semester abroad in Japan, I had a strange encounter with a ghostly, scarred woman in a green dress. And when I got back to America, she was already waiting for me in my home. I'm not just some crazy girl. You'll believe me if you just take a moment and see the leech the way I saw it. I know you will. Just listen. It started when I was in Japan. I'd been living with a host family for a few months, and my semester abroad was almost over. I had the nerve to believe I'd begun to acclimate, that I understood their culture and could call myself one of them. On more than a few nights, gathered around the fire, they told me their superstitions and scary stories. Their myths were very different from the ones I'd grown up with, and I found them fascinating, but not scary. They were too different. There was a heavy emphasis on choice. Rather than facing a mindless slasher that simply wanted to kill you, many Japanese horror stories involved entities approaching an unwary victim in a public space and giving them a choice. If the victim answered one way, they would be killed horribly in a specific manner. If the victim took the other choice, they would be killed horribly in another specific manner. These unwinnable situations made me laugh until the father of my host family explained to me in quiet tones the true subtext. It was all about the third option. It was all about the innate fear of customs in a very traditional society. The only way to survive was to simply know the acceptable third answer and give that one instead. He squeezed my arm and told me that I, as a foreigner, stood no chance of knowing the third answer. If I saw someone approaching me in public, no matter how innocent it seemed, I was to run away before they could speak and give me that fatal choice. I smiled and laughed it off, but his warning made me shiver a few times over my last few days. As a girl alone in another country, I was already on guard while walking through public spaces. But the towering maze of Tokyo took on a gray and tense tone whenever I thought of what might lurk amongst the crowds. I stuck to paths that went through the many hidden gardens and parks, and I always looked around warily. That fear faded, though. I can't tell you why, not exactly. I was young, I thought I was smart, and I was American. Nothing could really hurt me. And besides, I was one of them now, right? I'd spent months there living like they did. So, on my last day, when a woman began walking intently towards me from the opposite end of a long subway car, I stayed in my seat. She had long black hair, beautiful dark eyes, and a dark green dress that seemed out of place in a crowded car, otherwise filled with gray shirts, dark suits, and white blouses. I saw these details about her before I saw the deep scars on her face and hands, as if a maniacal American slasher had brutally carved her up and left her to die some years ago. As she shuffled towards me, the lights flickered once. The boy in the seat next to me shivered and focused worriedly on his portable game. Adults looked away, tense, and the teenagers opposite me finally stopped talking and began staring at their shoes. They knew. They knew, and there was nothing any of them could or would do for me. I was a foreigner and a stranger to them. But they listened. Oh, did they listen? I could almost hear them straining their ears to hear her whispers over the keening of wheels on rails beneath us. Every small step the woman took seemed louder than the one before. Even then, I still didn't believe. I thought it was a prank or someone being strange. I thought the others in the car with me were turning away out of courtesy or disgust at her scars. When I saw a tear fall from the cheek of the boy next to me, when I saw it splatter onto his game screen while he continued to pretend to play, that was when I understood. She stood directly above me, and I raised my eyes to meet hers. Her scars crinkled horribly as she gave me a seemingly innocent smile, and she asked in a pleasant but whispery voice, "Do you have a sister?" I froze. If I said yes, what would happen? If I said no, what else would happen? When the lights flickered again and her face moved without moving right down close to mine, I almost panicked and told her the truth. Inches away from me, her smile widened. She turned her head slowly, horribly slowly, until her neck reached a 90-degree angle. On the verge of passing out from fright, I forced myself to start breathing again. Her smile turned into an angry frown. I cowered back against the person behind me, who shrieked. The scarred woman in green began to reach for me, but the car came to a smooth stop, the doors opened, and I dodged around her and ran out with the crowd. To their credit, none screamed. They simply hurried off to their various destinations while attempting to seem like nothing was wrong. Nobody wanted to draw attention to themselves. Nobody wanted to get noticed by the woman in green or by polite society. I ran all the way to my host family's house, but nobody was home. It was my last day, and we'd already said our goodbyes, but it still felt odd that they were gone. Still trembling, I took a taxi to the airport, made my flight, and tried to rationalize the encounter away. The only hint I had that it had even happened was a small cut on my upper arm where she had nearly grabbed me with her horribly long nails, a cut that had, strangely, already begun to heal into a scar. Hours into my international flight, I finally began to calm down, and I even started feeling a bit smug. Not only had I survived an encounter with a Japanese horror entity, I'd even managed to immediately take a flight straight the hell out of the country. I would not end up another unwitting cautionary tale. I was a born and bred American girl that had seen every horror movie under the sun, and I'd made all the right decisions. Awesome. I told the story to the guy sitting next to me on my flight, and he asked, "What if she shows up here on the plane? Where will you run?" Yeah, I shut up right about then and stayed tense for the next few hours. Eventually, though, I realized I would be doomed no matter what if the woman in the green dress showed up here, so I finally gave in and slept. Awake or asleep, it didn't matter. My neighboring guy woke me before we landed, joked that he'd kept guard, and reported that nobody had come for me while I'd been out. Half-heartedly thanking him, I made polite conversation, left the plane, got my stuff, and met my parents outside the airport. It was bright, sunny, and open here, and it was a relief to be back home. This was a land of simple horrors, of gory violence, zombies, and haunted locations. The scarred woman in the green dress would have no power here if indeed she'd existed at all. I was talkative and happy on the ride home, and my parents were happy to see me. I didn't tell them about my horrible encounter because it honestly slipped from my mind. Everything was good. I was safe. We pulled up to the house where I'd grown up, and it looked exactly like I'd remembered. Only a few months had gone by, true, but it felt like a lifetime. Lugging in my stuff alongside my dad, I began to recount some funny memory that had come to mind when I entered the front door, turned toward the kitchen, and saw her standing there. Green dress, scars, smile and all, the woman from the subway car thousands of miles distant stood waiting for me in my childhood home. She gave that same eerie smile and lifted a large knife. I screamed and dropped my bags. Startled, my father dropped his too, and my mother rushed in from outside. The woman in green brought the knife down. She raised it and then brought it down again, chopping vegetables. Mistaking my reaction, my mother began screaming with me, but happily, and she pulled me forward. "It's good to see your sister again, isn't it?" Suddenly, I was forced into a hug with both my mom and the woman in green, but instead of trying to hurt me, the horrible stranger just smiled. "It's good to see you, sis." I pulled away, trembling forcefully. I immediately sensed that something was off, and I'd seen enough movies to know to keep my cards close to my chest. "Mom, what's going on?" "What do you mean, honey?" she asked, smiling happily at us both before moving deeper into the kitchen to help cook. The scarred woman in green kept her gaze and neutral smile fixated on me as I moved away from her, around the kitchen island and toward my mom. "Why is she here?" "Who?" "Her," I returned the woman's stare. My mother laughed. "You've been away too long, dear. You remember that your sister's graduated and back from college now." I gulped. "Humor me, Mom. Why doesn't she look like us?" My father came down the stairs, returning from dropping off my bags, and gave me a black look. "I thought we were past this. It's not nice to keep harping on your sister for being adopted." Horrified, I took a step back and bumped into the fridge. "But how?" "Oh, I guess I'm super jet lagged. Sorry, I was just trying to remember when that was for a birthday present for her and all." My father sighed. "Same day you were born." He stepped out to get more bags from the car. I turned away, mortified. My sister never took her gaze off of me, almost taunting me with her expressionless invasion. As we both stood there, facing off silently, she lifted her knife and brought it down, on her own arm, right along one of her scars. She didn't flinch. Instead, I did. Gripping my arm and looking down, I saw the skin slice open, bleed, heal, and fade into a scar in moments. Aghast, I looked at her and saw the equivalent cut disappearing from her arm. Her smile grew a little wider. I opened my mouth to scream something with fury, but the scarred woman lifted a knife and pointed it at my mother's back. The implication was clear. The best I could do was take the knife from her by offering to cook and insisting that my sister sit down at the table and relax. She did so, apparently willing to play a social game of cat and mouse. As I chopped up vegetables and stared at the scar on my arm, my thoughts raced. This entity had somehow attached itself to my life. Looking around at pictures in the kitchen, I saw her in photographs that I recognized. Family photos that now included her as a child, as a teenager, as a woman, scarred from the outset. I kept my eyes on her as she sat at the table, and she stared right back at me the entire time. Her disfigured smile never once changed. We actually sat down and had dinner as a family. My parents didn't seem to notice that my sister never spoke unless directly addressed, and even then only with perfect politeness. She ate a little and kept her eyes always on me. Halfway through dinner, I got angry and I slammed my fist on the table. She took her dinner knife and drew it across her cheek. I fought hard not to scream as I felt my face split open, bleed, and then heal. I already knew there would be a scar, but I excused myself to go to the bathroom and look for myself. Once there, it occurred to me that the leech, a leech on my life, time, and soul, seemed to be punishing me for rudeness. I remember saying to the mirror, "All right, you bitch, I'll play your game. I just needed time to figure out." Another slice opened up near my ear, bled, and quickly healed over into a scar. She'd heard me from the dining room. Or she could hear me no matter what. Walking carefully back into the dining room, I put on my best graces and sat with a smile. I couldn't think about the scars. Were they permanent? Would I live the rest of my life disfigured? Plastic surgery might fix a few, but if this kept going, no, I would just have to be polite and proper until I could figure out how to destroy her. I volunteered to help clean up dinner and do the dishes, and my mother seemed surprised, saying that my time in Japan had done me good. I didn't know what she meant by that, but I managed to get through the evening without any further scars. That night, I tried to whisper to my father in the dark, but he didn't understand what I meant, and I earned another scar on my arm. I slipped downstairs and into her room. My sister sat holding a knife to her arm and grinning wider than I'd ever seen. "What do you want?" I asked her. She held the knife higher on her arm, just above a clear patch of skin where her scars had left her and been transferred to me. "Do you have a sister?" Suddenly, remembering that moment of mortal threat in the subway car, I said nothing. She did not cut herself, but she did wait, always staring, ever staring. I backed out and went to my own bedroom where I lay stressed for hours. I did sleep eventually, but only because jet lag forced me into it. The next few days were filled with terribly costly chess moves. I invited over old friends to see if they'd recognized her as my sister, and they did. For each of these conversations with confused friends, I earned another scar. The leech knew what I was trying to do, and she disapproved. The worst part was running into an ex-boyfriend and finding out that he didn't remember our relationship. After much pressure, he finally admitted, "I liked your personality, but I didn't ask you out because of your scars. Sorry." I remember screaming, earning another scar for it. Rushing home, I looked at old yearbook pictures. The scars weren't just appearing now, they were appearing back then, too. I'd always had them. That same ex boyfriend would later remember asking out my sister instead. The leech was draining away my life right before my eyes. What would happen when she ran out of scars and I had them all? I couldn't talk to my parents. I couldn't talk to my friends. I shut myself in my room and spent each day alone to avoid any further social improprieties. I'd been raised American, raised rude, proud, and free, and I kept making mistakes. It was in me to swear, to nettle, to tease, and the cost was just too high. My host family's father had been right. I was losing because I was from the wrong culture. Had I been a traditional and proper Japanese girl, the leech might never have punished me even once. The leech existed to punish deviants. The leech fed off of outsiders, rebels, and bad children. The leech was part of me now. She only had a few scars left when the idea came to me. She had this huge asinine grin all the time now and stood in my room while I slept, staring at me, basically daring me to say something rude. She held a knife over me while I slept, yes, but it was not to cut me, it was to cut herself. And that's what gave me the idea. Furious and desperate beyond description, I decided that I wanted my life back at any cost. I'd been thinking of the leech in two ways. I could avoid being rude and live under her threat for the rest of my life, Or I could be myself and find out what punishment awaited once all the scars had been inflicted upon me. I feared that second option. I was terrified. When the leech became clear and beautiful and I became horrid and misshapen, what would she do to me next? Would she kill me? Discard me when I stopped being useful? Would I cease to exist altogether? Would my life completely become hers? I'd been so afraid of that second option, it took me until she only had one scar left to remember what my benefactor had said. There was a third option, one unknowable to any but the most socially integrated, and I'd had enough time to see that, for the leech, the social game went both ways. We were not in Japan. We were in America. Here, victims got tough when the end was nigh. She was with me always then. She walked directly behind me, goading me, irritating me, pushing me with her silence and her grin. Oh, that perfect smile and that beautiful face, it mocked me. I stood in the kitchen with her and I drew out the same knife she had been holding when I'd first come home and found her attached to my life and timeline like the horrific leech that she was. I smiled at her, matching her expression, and I brought the knife down before she could react. Not on her, on myself. I slashed open my arm and blood splattered across the kitchen island. She gasped and pulled back, her hair hiding her face. I saw her clutch her arm and I saw a scar appear in the equivalent place where I had slashed myself. I wasn't healing, but I had actually managed to injure her. I thought long and hard about it. Cutting her would only mean cutting myself, but cutting myself meant cutting her. I slashed again, this time on my face. She screamed. Finally, God! I'd long prayed to hear that noise from her. I slashed again on my leg and she fell to her knees. My blood splattered across her green dress, soiling it, and I slashed myself again and again and again. I felt faint, and still I cut myself, turning my arms, legs, face, and tummy into oozing mincemeat and gobs of flesh. With each strike, she screamed louder and crumpled further. I fell to my knees before her, a wall of pain and ebbing gore, and I smiled at her as her scream reached a crescendo that soared into nothingness. With a last gasp, she shrank and blackened until she became nothing more than a grasping little animal, an actual leech. Without a person to latch onto, she was nothing but a worm. With the last of my strength, I stood up and stomped on her. It was over. I called 911 after that, of course, and equally as expected, you think I'm crazy. But you have to listen. She was real, but she's gone now, and I'm not going to do this again. I killed her. I know I'll be scarred all over just like she was, but at least I'll get to live. I'll get to swear. I'll get to drink. I'll get to. Remorse? For what? Why are you asking me that question? Find the guy on the plane. He'll tell you what I told him. No way he'd forget. You're not hearing me. Find anyone who was on the subway that day in my car. They'll tell you. Why do you keep saying that? Stop asking me that question. She was a leech. She took everything that should have been mine. If she'd just never been adopted, it would have been my life. They would have been my friends, my boyfriends, my prom date. She was always there, always in my goddamn house, always so much better than me, always mocking me with that beautiful face. I don't have a sister. That's it. That's the end.
I'm a little confused. Also a little horrified in the sense I'm like, oh wow, like I like the play off the like diffusion of responsibility because like in a real life situation when you're surrounded by people, a lot of people will just be like, I'm not gonna deal with it and no one's gonna help you. And this idea of like you could be in the crowd, but you could be like the least safe that you are. I love the idea of like the haunting following you around. It's very like reminds me of when I watched The Grudge and they shipped Sarah Michelle Gellar back to the US to the loony bin and she was like, "No, it's still here."
I mean, it does make sense. It's like why would international borders have any like I mean, I guess it depends what lore you believe. Like maybe they're spellbound in some way, curse bound to a certain geographic location. But if like this entity is really powerful, why would something as silly as like you taking a flight make it leave your life suddenly?
I always also really want to know like why people get targeted by the entities. I mean, at the beginning you said it was like an entity that punishes like deviants, outsiders, like misbehaving children. So it's just like some kind of energy that wants to like keep you in line.
Yeah, I guess the original one is similar in that it's a woman entity who goes up to like random people and asks a like binary question. The question is like, do you think I'm pretty? And you're fucked if you say yes or no. So you have to say something like, you're just okay, or like, you're fine, I guess, or like something like neutral like that. And then she'll get like pissed long or like confused slash pissed long enough for you to like run away. But if you say yes or no, you're like screwed either way. And she apparently is like slashed across the
Yes,
face.
yes, yes. I
So,
noticed
oh,
that.
you've heard of this. So yeah, so it's like a modern take on that one. But I did read all the comments after the story, like below the story, and basically it's like all like an allegory for her actual life of like she had an adopted sister, like a real sister, a normal sister who she was jealous of her whole life. Maybe she was the one who was scarred or like ugly in some way her whole life, and she was jealous of her adopted sister getting the friends and the boyfriends and whatever, having the life she always wanted because she was the ugly one or whatever. And then she killed her sister, probably. Like, that's because she killed this leech. And if it's like supposed to be a whole little wrapper around something real, then
Well, there's also this like idea in horror movies where sometimes where when you kill the horror, you become the horror. And that was kind of like what I got at the end of it, where like maybe she did get rid of it, but then part of it is that's just you now.
well, yeah, that was both our stories. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let us know in the comments which story you enjoyed or what parts of each story you enjoyed. If y'all know some good scary stories that are ideally real or what you think might be real, or some like cool folktale lore things that have been passed down through your family or friends or something like that, let us know in the comments of wherever you're currently watching or listening to this. And happy
Happy
Halloween. Hope you guys
Halloween.
have a fun time and weekend.
And as always, listeners, come back next week for a fresh new episode. And until then, 再
再见,
见,
bitches.
bitches.